Welcome everyone to Cultural Connections, and mae CysylltiadauDiwylliannol yn rhoi mwy o wybodaeth I chi am enwyr lleoedd a'r diweddau lle rydym yn byw. And some of the names that we give places that we live are named after people, descriptions, historical events, and anything in between. But this video is going to be flexibly bilingual. So some is going to be in English, a bydd rhai yn Gymraeg. Mae gennym lawer o westeion gwych heddiw. I'll introduce those guests very, very soon. But this is part of the Cultural Connections project commissioned by Merthyr County Borough Council and being delivered by a team led by TACP, but it comprises of Black Mountains Archaeology, GeoArch, Hugh James Media, and Jack Pullman Slater. Mae gan bob rhan o'r tîm gefndir a sgil wahanol. So on the webinar today, we have Harry Evans, who's from Merthyr County Borough Council, Tim Ryblewski, an environmental planner with a geography background from TACP, Richard Lewis, an archaeologist from Black Mountains Archaeology, Tim Young, an archaeologist from GeoArch, Jack Pullman Slater, a Welsh language tutor researching the Welsh language through Cardiff University, and then me, Hugh James. So to kick us off, why don't you introduce the project, Tim?
So the Cultural Place Names project was born out of a concern that there was a decline in the use of traditional Welsh place names across Merthyr County Borough Council and Rhondda Cynon County Borough Council. There's a number of reasons why it was perceived that this was happening: rise in social media, fitness tracking platforms, anglicisation of place names, and just a general sort of disconnect with the landscape. So we've been looking into why this has happened. We've been looking into some of the more traditional place names across the region, what's driven the development of those. And we have been developing a series of materials to engage with the public and essentially try and promote a bit of understanding about the project and about the traditional place names that exist in this part of Wales. And I think it's fair to say it goes beyond this part of Wales as well. You know, this project's relevant and applicable across the whole of Wales, certainly from a Welsh language component, but beyond as well. You know, this is probably something that's happening elsewhere as well. You know, it's an important means to preserve Welsh culture for future generations. Harry, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Right, so fel ddwedodd Tim, cyfle I bobl a'n gysylltu gyda enwau lleoedd traddodiadol yw CysylltiadauDiwylliannol. A'r mae yna nifer rheswm tu ôl comisiynu'r prosiect yma, ac un ohonyn nhw oedd y bygythiad I enwau sydd nawr yn digwydd trwy apiau fel sydd yn boblogaidd iawn gyda bobl sy'n gwneud gweithgaredd awyr agored. So o'n i'n gweld hynny bygwth mawr achos mod yr enwau newydd ma'n cael eu recordio. Ac fel hynny, o'n i'n meddwl bod nhw'n bygythiad mawr I enwau traddodiadol Cymraeg. Ac oherwydd hynny, wnaethon ni comisiynu TACP I datblygu'r rhaglen yma I gael bobl a gysylltu gyda enwau lleoedd traddodiadol.
Diolch yn galon, Harry. Thank you so much, Tim, for a wonderful introduction to the project. And even though we've been working on this for a long time through COVID and what feels like 10 years, I've been happy to work on it for a long time because I've learned so much through doing this. You know, I live in a certain part of Wales outside Merthyr Council, but you know, because of this project, I've gone out myself and found different places, different things to look at. And whether that's in language or the landscape or in the culture, one of the things that really works for this project is it touches lots of different subjects. You know, the cultural place names and landscapes that we all live in and we all work in, it's a little bit of everything. So Tim, do you want to kind of take us through a little bit of the opportunities that we have when working inside this project and outside it for the different subjects that we could touch on and the different things that we could try?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the project is so applicable across, a range of topics taught in school and across the curriculum. And as you say, Hugh, the last 18 months or so of delivering the project, it's really become very obvious that it could fit into several different lessons. And it might not be a whole lesson taught about Welsh place names or a specific place, but even if there's opportunities just to bring in the place name aspect into another topic that's being discussed, it would be a great opportunity to utilise the project and just explore that Welsh culture a little bit more. So with that in mind, we've put together this webinar, and we're going to explore the different topics of the curriculum. So we're going to have a look at some of the humanities aspects, health and well-being, expressive arts, languages, literacy and communication, and maths, numeracy, and science and technology. And we've had some discussions with teachers, and we've got some ideas that we've formulated ourselves. So we're just going to present some of those and look at perhaps just piquing some interest in the project and hopefully giving you guys being the teachers, something to use in your classrooms. Jack, I'm aware that there's a new curriculum on the horizon. Is there any specific aspects of that this project really fits well with?
Heb os, felly bydd yr athrawon sy'n gwrando ar hyn yn ymwybodol am sut y bydd y cwricwlwm newydd yn edrych a sut y bydd dysgu yn cael ei drefnu o amgylch 6 maes eang mewn gwirionedd, meysydd dysgu a phrofiad. Ac bod y prosiect hwn yn ymwneud ag un agwedd sydd efalle'n fwy ieithyddol ei natur, sef y dirwedd ieithyddol, mae sgôp enfawr ar gyfer ei ddefnyddio ar draws y 6 maes. Ac mae hyn nid yn unig oherwydd natur y cwricwlwm newydd sydd yn ymwneud â phrosiectau, ond hefyd oherwydd natur y prosiect ei hun, sef ymwneud ag enwau a chanddynt gysylltiadau cryf a phobl a'r iaith a'r dirwedd, ond hefyd o ran y ffyrdd yma'ch mudiad chi a phobl eraill sydd yn ymuno heddi wedi ymwneud â'r enwau hyn drwy ddefnyddio dulliau technolegol a daearyddol modern a chyfoes.
So within all these opportunities that we could touch on, and I've, over the last kind of 18 months, learned things about the cultural heritage of where I live, about the different place names. I actually learnt, having lived there for 37 years, the name, what the actual Welsh pronunciation and Welsh meaning of my town name is, which I hadn't known for 37 years. There's so much to bring out here. So let's start with the humanities, the geography, all the different types of humanities that we could bring out here. Tim, can you lead us into a few of the things that we could study here?
Okay, yeah. I mean, geography is a significant aspect to all of this. We'll talk a little bit more around some of the drivers behind place names, and you'll pick them up throughout this. But there's several. But the geography of Wales and the landscape that we live in is a key one. So things like streams, hills, and rivers, Bryn, Nant, Aber, they're key words that feature throughout Welsh place names, and it points to a strong focus on geography. So there's a good opportunity to explore the project through geography lessons, and coming up with some ideas. It might be as simple as exploring the local area on maps, exploring the concept of maps. It could be as simple as putting a map on the wall and asking the class to put pins on, I suppose, as to where the most significant places are to them. That could be at a class level, at a school level. Use different colours for different classes. For really young ages, it could be as simple as exploring places that are significant to them in their own homes or their gardens. Their dad's chair, for example. It sounds silly, but it's got some significance and meaning to them, and it begins to develop that understanding and concept of place and sense of place that could be taken further then. You could also look at exploring the landscape with their favourite character, plotting a journey through the landscape and various parts of the region that they might explore. Could be their favourite teddy or favourite car, or you name it. I've got a toddler and their favourite toy changes weekly, and it's always something that seems rather bizarre. So it could be quite an exciting and interesting activity for them to complete. And as I touched on at the beginning, you know, as an English speaking person myself, you know, understanding some key Welsh names for parts of the landscape, geographical terms, has really helped me to understand place names and where they're derived from, and what kind of story they're trying to tell. So if we can try and promote that understanding a little bit better, then all the better. But Jack, we talked briefly before that you know, that's obviously very relevant to someone who's perhaps coming at this as a Welsh learner, but perhaps less so for somebody who is at a Welsh medium school. Are there any other sort of angles that we could explore or teachers could explore with this?
Heb os. Felly, o ystyried cyd-destun cyfrwng Cymraeg, neu rhain sydd ar Gymraeg yn famiaeth iddynt efallai, dyw cyfeirio at rannau enwau llefydd fel Nant a Mynydd a Bryn ac ati, ddim o reidrwydd o berthnasedd iddyn nhw fel siaradwyr a defnyddwyr iaith hyderus. Ond yn hytrach, ambell waith mae'r geiriau hyn yn cyfeirio at ddiwylliant neu iaith a oedd, enghraifft y gair glas, ac felly mae'r gair hynny yn un diddorol oherwydd mae'n cyfeirio at amser a chyfnod yn y Gymraeg lle oedd y gair hwnnw yn cyfeirio at dri lliw, sef y gwyrdd, llwyd a glas sydd gyda ni heddi. Ac wedyn o ran diwylliannau presennol heddi fel diwylliannau Celtaidd eraill, mae yna gysylltiad yna go ddiddorol rhwng ni yma yng Nghymru ac enghraifft Iwerddon neu Llydaw neu Gernyw enghraifft. Felly mae yna ongel ddiddorol i siaradwyr a defnyddio'r Cymraeg sydd hefyd yn edrych ar rannu'r gair, ond ddim efallai o safbwynt cyfieithu i'r Saesneg.
And one of the things I really find about about languages in general, because it used to be important for us to name places after the things that we see, the descriptive names, and it feels like with modern GPS and with things with new maps and things, it becomes less important to have something like I live on the Bryn, and it feels less important maybe to have that known as a geographical descriptor. Now you can name it anything you like, and your GPS will get you there, obviously. But the Welsh language is very descriptive when it comes to naming places, I feel. So through history, let's start with you, Tim Young. Through history, how has this kind of shown itself in our place names and in our landscapes?
Yeah, I think you're right. There are early names which are particularly descriptive, and of course people who are dominantly agricultural will be very close to the land, and the details of landforms and the things they see around them will be very important to them. So perhaps some of our oldest place names are those of rivers, and moving forward in time, the hills and descriptions of woods and things, perhaps often medieval origins, and then getting through into more descriptions of the place itself, the town or the village, are more recent concerns. And I think it is important that when we're talking about place names, although there is that geographical information coded in them, that information comes from the past. Somebody at some point in the past created that name, and that becomes another thing we can address with the children in the school, that the names that they're familiar with will have been created at some point in the past and provide a direct link with the everyday lives of people back in the past. And it's that nature of everyday life which is, I think, one of the features of the curriculum, and one of one of the subjects that should be covered, and this is an insight. People named things that were important to them and which they encountered in their daily lives.
So it seems that we can. There's a whole breadth of topics that can be covered through the place names, but through history, right, Richard?
Yes, indeed. I mean, place names offer us something slightly different to archaeology more generally, or even history, written history as we understand it from the Roman period onwards. Place names are very much, as Tim alluded to, very much created by the people who are living in in the landscape, and they offer us a kind of a slightly different window into the past. So whereas archaeology, quite often we can dig pieces of pottery up and things like that, tangible links to the past, but actually the place name gives us something slightly more. It gives us almost a roadmap of how these areas and these names have changed because of the different influxes of people or changing fashions, for example. So in Wales more generally, we have evidence of Roman names, of Viking names, of medieval names, right the way through to influences from all over the UK and Europe during the industrial period. So place names are really, really interesting, and the children can certainly, as Tim alluded to, by looking at their house name, the lane or the road that they live on, for example, or even the fields in their grandparents' farm, for example. They all shed a light into what has happened historically in that very, very small area. So there's a lot that the children can learn without having to move very far at all.
I love we were talking about an idea of getting students to write down their favorite facts of their local area and go and place them around the room. Get 5 facts and place it different parts of the classroom, and you can go and gather facts and read them out for the crowd. Harry, what's through this project one of your favorite facts that you've learned about Merthyr and the surrounding area that you would go and place in that classroom for your fellow students, which would be us to go and find yn Gymraeg?
Right. Ffaith gorau ynglyn â Merthyr Tydfil? Wel, wi ddim yn gwybod os yw hyn yn ffaith neu beidio, ond efallai mae enw gwrywaidd yw Tydfil, a fod Tydfil ddim yn ferch i Brychamcheiniog.
I think he or she could be whatever. We know so little about the fifth century. There probably was somebody called Tydfil because that's enshrined from an ecclesiastical point of view.
I mean, that's the trouble with these myths and legends, is that they change a lot over kind of decades and centuries, and they can be really whatever we want them to be. We hang on to them as traditions and as stories because we are innately storytellers. So that leads us in nice to one of the other things that we could be talking about in our cultural place names and landscapes is the expressive arts side of it. Tim, I know you are a prolific expressive artist. What kind of things would you be looking for in our myths and legends and acting these kind of stuff out, the painting and everything else?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the acting side of things. The myths and legends really lend themselves well to drama lessons. Either acting out the generally accepted version of events, or even interpreting it for themselves and acting out that interpretation. I think there's real scope to explore the project and some of those myths and legends which have lent themselves to places in the region through drama lessons. This was a new concept to me, but hot seating, whereby students become or children become a location or a particular myth or a legend, and the rest of the class ask them questions, and they've got to essentially investigate and guess what that person is. So you could learn about a specific style of art and then draw and paint and picture of a place of significance either to them or, that features one of these myths or legends. And, the list goes on. You could paint where you live and what makes that's significant to you. And again, that's applicable across a whole range of ages because, even the youngest ages, their home is, probably one of the most significant parts of their lives. And right up then through older age groups, you can bring in other aspects, looking at different types of art and famous artists, etc. There's also quite an interesting project looking at sound and the sound of places. It's a little bit of a deviation, I suppose, away from place names, but there's still opportunity to bring that place name component in to learning about the specific sounds of places. And there's a global project at the moment trying to map sounds so they could be explored. And then there's the whole area of Welsh music and culture and television, for which I am not the best person to speak about, but it certainly would, feature well within some of these lessons. And I don't know, Jack or Harry, if there's any Welsh music or Welsh musicians that you're particularly fond of that have any place name connection. I'm putting you on the spot here, but
Wel, wrth gwrs mae yna y Merthyr, mae yna Joseph Parry, so cafodd ei eni yn Chapel Street yw e, a bwys y camlas fyna Merthyr, a fe cyfansoddodd y gan enwog Myfanwy, famously by a number of choirs and even Cerys Matthews, I believe.
I think you're right, Harry, that the Welsh are known for the music. If you heard me sing, you wouldn't think that was true. But it's definitely something that within the expressive arts and maybe in music sections that people can start telling more stories and talk about the places that they're from and the things that they do through song as well. Jack, we've got a bit of a history in Wales of doing that, and the Welsh language, I think, is particularly good at doing that.
Ond dwi'n meddwl rhywbeth sydd yn berthnasol neu'n ddiddorol am gyd-destun y prosiect hwn efallai yw bod ni yng Nghymru efallai yn dueddol o feddwl bod yr emynau a'r chwedle ac ati i gyd yn berthyn i'r fro Gymraeg ac i'r gorllewin, ond mae'r prosiect hwn yn dangos yn eitha glir bod chwedle a cherddoriaeth ac ati yn bodoli ymhlith yr enwau llefydd dych chi wedi coladu yn ystod y prosiect yma, a bod y diwylliant hwnnw a'r iaith, a'r gerddoriaeth ac ati yn berthyn i'r broedd sydd yn y prosiect yma, a ddim just yn rhywbeth sydd yn bodoli ar gyrion arfordirol Cymraeg eu iaith traddodiadol yng Nghymru.
I'm just waiting for the day that Wales is finally in the Eurovision Song Contest. I think we would do very well. All these things, though, all these things through the expressive arts could well be done indoors or outside. And I want to quickly touch on health and well-being and the fact that this project really lends itself to being outside and going out and exploring your local environment, actually going to the places where these names come from. So Tim, this project really lends itself to the well-being part of the Welsh curriculum, I suppose.
Yeah, it does, and health and well-being now it's integrated across most parts of Welsh policy, and education is clearly not excluded from that. So you're right. There's great opportunity here to go outdoors and learn about places. I mean, that would be the best place to learn about a lot of these. Clearly, that's not always possible. The weather isn't always on our side, and it's not always easy to take 30 kids out to see a cairn on top of a hill. But where those opportunities exist, it just really enhances that connection with the story and really brings it to life. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. It could be as simple as going and having a look at some street names in and around the school, or asking kids and parents to explore that on the weekends. And maybe if they're out and about or on holiday even in other parts of Wales or even further afield, to have a look at the place names there and have a look at what might have driven their development. So, again, it's probably not an aspect of the curriculum that you're going to dedicate entirely to place names, but I think perhaps whilst you're out and about doing other things, place names could perhaps begin to feature in some of those outdoor activities. And kids love being outdoors, don't they? So why not engage them with this topic whilst they're in an environment that they love?
Yeah, I mean, like going back to my primary school, come rain or shine, in a little anorak, stood outside doing whatever. It didn't really matter. We grew up like it. But that is, the health and well-being section is really one that you could do cross-curricular with any of these other ones. We talked briefly about the Expressive Arts one and heading out to places that lend themselves to being painted, for example. A nice kind of rural area, maybe a common where you can go and just sit everyone down and paint a particular feature. Richard, I know you've got a few of your favorite ones that through this project you've talked about time and time and time and time and time again. But we've loved it.
Well, I like prehistory and I like funerary monuments, but no, Merthyr Common is wonderful. A walk across Merthyr Common is really good for you for a start. On the top of the common there is just to the south of the fossil fram mine, you've got a preserved prehistoric landscape with literally dozens of cairns, and on the highest point you've got a cairn called Carn Beagle, the shepherd's cairn, and that certainly lends itself to drawing. Taking the children up the drawing, it's very visible. You can see it in the landscape. You can see these other 4,000-year-old burial mounds, in the landscape. And over in Llanwano, there's also burial mounds over there. Another one that's called Carn Pigoin, which I'm crucifying the Welsh language, but which I believe means the conical cairn. So there are some wonderful sites that you can get out with. Children love being outside, and as Tim said, on the route you're going to be beseeched with place names and road names and village names. So yeah, get out there and get your boots on.
Yeah, I think another thing you could do, sort of crossing over again between the health and well-being and the expressive arts. We touched in the podcast on the slightly controversial idea that some of the river names were based on animal names because of the perceived behaviour of the animal. So just going out and thinking about the soundscape of rivers, listening to them, how are they behaving, what are the noises they're making, does that suggest a particular sort of behaviour? Again, it's the sort of thing you could easily do and play with as an exercise, either with recordings teachers already made or by going out into the landscape and listening yourselves.
So Harry, given the opportunity, your teacher says to you, you've got to go out now, or we're all going to go out to a specific location around by you to paint a really nice picture. A, could you do it? Are you a painter? And B, where would that be for you?
Na, rwy ddim yn gallu peintio'n rhy dda, ond falle sy'n ni yn mynd...
I don't believe it.
Falle sy'n ni'n mynd i pistyll gole falle yn Llanwno. Mae hwnna'n ardal rili bert, a mae yna rhaeadr sychnant hwnna sy'n sychu pan bod ddim lot o law. Falle fydd y braidd yn risgi mynd na llond dosbarth o blant bach, ond wy'n siŵr mae yna cyfle i grwpiau llai i fynd i weld y llefydd yma.
And we talked a little bit about these Welsh place names, and in that part where we talked about Richard kind of going up to into the Cairns, and he talked about his pronunciation of the Welsh language. I think that's something that we really need to talk about within this, and we did talk about it in the podcast series as well, which is still available online. You can go back and listen to. we're into languages, literacy and communication, and we could chat to you, Jack, about this. It's something that I felt as a Welsh learner over the last few years. I didn't go to a Welsh language school. I learned up until I was about 14, and slowly learning and getting back into it now. But I feel like we're getting into an age of that's trying our best when it comes to pronouncing the Welsh language. It's going to come up in non-Welsh language schools when they're trying to pronounce these places. What's the current thinking on? I mean, my current thinking is everyone should give it a go, regardless. What's your current thinking of us getting back into this and pronouncing the places that are around us? Should we just give it a go? What's the current format?
Is exactly that, is a supportive one. So in the areas that this project looked at, these are areas in which there was an incredibly rapid language shift from Welsh to English at the dawn of industrialisation, and this shift has created some very unique things about English and some unique things about Welsh in those areas. And we've tended to think of those pronunciations as perhaps being somehow substandard, but actually there's something incredibly unique about Welsh English and English Welsh in those areas. So the pronunciations that there are part of the linguistic heritage of the place. An example might be something like H dropping, which traditionally has been seen as something that you shouldn't do. But we know actually that it has existed in Welsh for hundreds of years before people started switching to English in those areas. So if someone says triaris instead of treharis, well, it's not that they're dropping their H actually, it's that they're preserving something that existed in the Welsh of that area hundreds of years ago. And so sometimes the boundaries between what's correct and what isn't, or what's good and what's not, are so blurred to the point that we can't really make a hard and fast distinction between them. So my answer really is that anything should go, not just because we should be lax about it, but because often these pronunciations are part of the linguistic heritage going back hundreds and hundreds of years.
And when thinking about the languages, literacy and communication that we find within schools and the things that we have to touch on, when thinking about Welsh language and how we can use this project, is there anything that jumps out at you, ways that the teachers could use the cultural place names and landscapes project to their advantage when thinking about language and the Welsh language?
Languages, literacy and communication area, there are loads of scope for creative writing tasks. And creative writing tasks that are grounded in something that language teachers will know call meanings that matter. So quite simply writing about stuff that you know about instead of some set task. And what better topic than where you live, because no one knows that better than you. So this might include things like poetry writing, and some suitable formats for primary school kids could be things like acrostics of place names, or haikus in traditional formats, which usually look at landscape, place and location, or simple rhyming couplets in which you can encourage cross-linguistic rhyming, so you can get the kids to rhyme the Welsh name with an English word, for example, to enhance their understanding of how the sounds of those two languages, our two languages, their two languages, are similar and different, and do that in a structured format, like a rhyming couplet.
That the use of English and Welsh in the place names themselves, and where those languages are used, and which places have names available in both languages, either as a sort of direct translation that's used, or in some cases entirely different names that are used, and exploring why those differences exist. I mean, I'm thinking of things like Athrawon and Maent, exploring the history of those two names, which are completely different origins, completely different bits of history involved. It's actually quite interesting how those languages coexist in the place names.
Hefyd, o'n i'n mynd i awgrymu sut oedd Meirdi a Mardi yn cael ei ehangu yn y Gymraeg, a bod Richard Morgan yn dadle mai yr sŵn a, sef Madi, yw'r un fwyaf cywir yn yr ardal yma, yn lle Meirdi fel fasau rhywun sy'n siarad Cymraeg efallai o'r gorllewin fel fi yn ehangu'r gair, neu'r enw, sori.
Well, no, it goes back to what we were talking about before when, the place names that we, and the language that we develop in our own towns, if it's written one way and then pronounced a different way, or, the local community starts calling it something different, that's just part of language. That's how language evolves, and new names get taken on. Old stuff maybe dies out, but we want to make, one thing we've tried to do in this project is make sure that that's noted down and that we don't lose that. But language is always kind of going forward. We need to move out of the kind of humanities, languages, expressive arts into more my field now, with things like mathematics and numeracy and science and technology, which this project still has a lot to offer. So one of my favorite things to do is look at maps. And Tim, within the mathematics and numeracy area, things like grid coordinates and maps, this is ripe for it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I share your passion. Maps are fantastic, and what better way as well to begin learning about place names than looking at old maps. But at a very basic level, you could encourage children to start to understand place names and the significance of place names by getting them to develop their own maps. Whether that's a map of the school or a map of their journey to school, or perhaps for slightly older children, a map of the county with places of significance on. And then you can also bring into that grids and coordinates and start to explore the concept of navigation and bearings. Again, this is clearly something that would need to be scaled and pitched according to the age group that you're teaching, but there really is quite a lot of opportunity here, I think, still. And even at a very simple level, it's something we haven't talked about, but just naming groups in classes by place names in the region. It doesn't have to be maths related. It could just be bringing in place names into a maths lesson that has absolutely nothing to do with place names. Still get some thinking about it. So I think maths, it's mainly probably maps, grids and coordinates really, and exploring that. But then you've got the whole health and well-being aspect. You can go outside and explore this. There really is this cross-curricular sort of application of place name and how we can learn about it. So I don't know if you've got anything else to add to maps, Hugh. I'm sure you do.
Always. I'm always looking at maps. Well, it's one thing that we've constantly talked about is the movement from physical maps to online maps to digital, and we've just got so much of an opportunity now to. Well, there's some of my favorite things to do is look at old maps on digital archives and things like that. Tim or Richard, what are the digital archives that you guys have been looking through?
We've been looking at the National Library for Scotland recently digitised all of the Ordnance Survey maps, and now they're publicly available. So these maps, some of them date back to sort of 1813, but most of the really good ones were done from the 1770s onwards, and they're really good. Many of the first editions they were printed on copper plates, and they were all of the rivers were hand drawn, so and the ponds and everything. So they're an absolutely wonderful resource that you can get lost in, but also critically preserve all of those original names. So when the OS workers went out and they were surveying, and they were talking to local people. I mean, yes, they quite often got the spelling wrong, because quite often the cartographers were English speaking and weren't Welsh speaking, or the fact that the Welsh speaking farmers weren't particularly literate. So you have lots of place names spelt lots of different ways. I know Tim touched on on Annis Owen, that's spelt quite a few different ways. So is Aberfan. So that's a wonderful resource which is free to use
and also, looking back through the history of these maps, when you go back and back and back, and you're looking at the same places, you see how they change, and how the landscape changes within them, how the population changes within them, but also how the industry changes there as well. You think about the Merthyr Valley and how dramatically that's changed over time, largely because of influx of population, going back to human geography there, but also looking at maps with math and numeracy. But, rapidly in science and tech, then when you're thinking about the reason that these places changed so dramatically and so quickly was because of that Wales was the first industrial nation where we had more people doing industry than agriculture, and just becoming more and more, because we had so many raw materials in the same place. Ironworks started springing up. I live very close to mines. My bamper was a miner. One of the amount of learning that we've got to do from an industrial Wales is incredible.
That's absolutely right. You've got the ability with the maps we were just talking about, these digital maps, to flick back through and trace that evolution. Unfortunately, most of them don't go back quite before the earliest industry. As Richard was saying, perhaps the earliest easily accessible maps are those of about 1810, the Ordnance Survey preliminary drawings, which you can get at through the British Library. But you can flick through the more recent Ordnance Survey maps, and you can follow the history of the place, perhaps your school. Flick back. Most of those will be superimposed on completely different landscapes in the earlier maps, and what was going on, and see the rise and the fall of the iron industry, the rise and then the fall of the coal industry, and perhaps changes to modern housing and communications. And you can see that all as a story unfold as you move between the different versions of the same map.
And one of the things that's happening in Wales at the moment is a big shift in how we manage our transport. And the early transport for us, especially in the trains and the railways, was to do with the industrial era, with the science and tech that was going on at the time, and how we would get all those natural resources around. And a lot of those train lines have died out, but now we're seeing a resurgence now, because we're slowly shifting to a more green economy. This is all kind of wrapped into the STEM and climate change and everything else. We're moving out of the old industrial era and more to a green era then. And Harry, I imagine within the whole Merthyr Vale, there's lots of the history of where that science used to be, but also, looking forwards, something students can definitely do is think about how the Vale can just be more green, put new transport links in there, and just think about the Merthyr of the future, I suppose.
Yeah, yn gwmws, mae yna cyfle fan hyn i edrych i'r dyfodol ac i ystyried sut mae, i ba raddau mae rhaid i bobl symud i ddechrau, gan bod ni'n ni'n cynnal y sesiwn yma ar-lein, a mae rhywun yma o Lundain, mae rhywun o Gaerdydd, a mae rhywun falle o Sir Benfro. So mae'r dyfodol yn wel, wi ddim yn gwybod shwt i ddisgrifio'r dyfodol i ddweud y gwir, ond os na angen i bobl symud cymaint, a lleith bobl cwrdd yn ar-lein, virtually mewn ffordd, a mae cyfle yna i disgyblion ystyried hyn ac i feddwl be maen nhw eisiau gwneud yn y dyfodol ynglyn â trafnidiaeth, a os sydd angen car neu byddwn ni'n gallu byw hebddyn nhw.
And what a great place to wrap that up on. The Cultural Connections project is part of the Wales Rural Development Plan 2014 to 2020, which is funded by the European Union Fund for Rural Development and the Welsh Government. It has been commissioned by Merthyr Tydfil Cynhyrchwyd Council, delivered by TACP UK Limited, Black Mountains Archaeology, GeoArch and Hugh James Media.
Mae CysylltiadauDiwylliannol yn rhan o gynllun datblygu gwledig Cymru 2014 i 2020 a ariannir gan Cronfa Amaethyddol Ewrop ar gyfer datblygu gwledig a Llywodraeth Cymru. Chomisiynwyd gan Cyngor Sirol Bwrdeistref Merthyr Tydfil a chynhyrchwyd gan TACP, Black Mountains Archaeology, GeoArch a Hugh James Media.